Welcome back to CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. Were you afraid of losing your edge when you first stepped into leadership? What if the real shift from engineer to leader isn't about learning to manage people, but about redefining your relationship with responsibility? In this episode, I'm joined by Michael Di Prisco, a deeply technical engineer who resisted leadership at first, determined not to lose his edge at the keyboard. Over time, he didn't abandon code, he rebalanced it. We explore authority versus accountability, technical depth, and why stepping back from writing code actually accelerated his team. And in an era when AI-assisted engineering is reinventing what it means to build software, this conversation might help you see the transition from engineer to leader in a different light. Whether you are coaching a team member through this transition or you're going through it yourself, this is a conversation worth hearing. I'm your host, Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises, helping you lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. If you feel like you're figuring it out the hard way, you're not alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders just like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and how you can stay up to date at thectoplaybook.com, where you can build your own playbook for your path at your pace. Let's meet Michael and explore his journey into engineering leadership. Michael, welcome to the CTO Playbook. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Adam.
And a little opening question. So if somebody was to meet you at a conference, for example, and ask you what you do today, not just your job title, but who you are, how would you describe yourself?
Well, let's say I'm a software engineer struggling to realize that he became a tech lead. That's how I present myself. No, jokes aside, I'm a software engineer in heart. I'm a nerdy guy. I'm an RPG guy. So for whoever is watching or listening to us, I'm an MMORPG fan. And I started working in software engineering about 15 years ago. And it was just because of games. Okay. So that's how I started. And then I started.
Oh, so it's such a strong connection to games then, yeah.
Games were all about statistics and algorithms. But during my career, I started to understand that those are not the only things you need to work with every day.
Excellent. And so one of the things I like about your work is you don't just build software, you kind of built knowledge in public as well, because you co-created an open source book, didn't you?
Yeah, we started working on this open source project about 2.5 years ago. And it started like simple LinkedIn post. I'm a LinkedIn serial poster. And I started gathering some people around the concept of an open source book. I didn't know the topic. In fact, the initial topic had to be about AI and open source, but the people decided to build a guide for developers.
Awesome, because that's now really quite well known, isn't it?
Yeah, it's, well, at least in Italy, because our target was Italy, and the only language currently available for the book is Italian. And yeah, I know that GitHub stars are a vanity metric, but it's the second or third Italian project for stars count on GitHub. So yeah, it became quite popular during the last couple of years.
Excellent. And what would you say is sort of the core problem that the book helps the reader resolve?
I read a lot of books about software engineering, about leadership, software architecture, testing, refactoring. We have a mutual friend, which is Lou Franco, which has been on the podcast before, and he talks a lot refactoring. But what I found missing in some of those books were some connections between topics. Okay, if you look at a book about refactoring, it's just about refactoring. If you read a book about software architecture, it's just about software architecture. Of course, just is not the correct word, but just to prove the point. And what missed was starting point for people entering this world, or people changing their career or trying to improve their career. And so I asked myself, what was the book that you wanted to read when you started your career as a developer? And so we started from there and started gathering some people and topics, because all the chapters in the book, which is a short book, of course, are written by someone else. So it's like 20 chapters, if I'm not wrong, 21 maybe. And those have been written by 24, 25 people, plus around 40, 50 reviewers.
Wow. So what surprised you most about bringing so many people together to build that one shared resource?
I've been very lucky, because I had the opportunity to know a lot of people and to make people know a lot of other people that they couldn't in any other way possible. So I started gathering people, which brought someone else. And we, at a certain point, at the peak of the amount of ambassadors, which are the people around me helping me with the project, we were about 40, if I'm not wrong, 40, 45.
Wow.
And there was one time at conference, I can't remember if it was the JS Day in Italy or the Laravel Day, one of those two, which are some of the most well-known conferences here in Italy. And 80% of the people talking on the stage were people behind the project of the book. So we gathered a lot of not only content creators, but people with real experience that wanted to share their knowledge to other people coming into the field.
And that's crucial then. Is this people who've got the actual experience, the hard-won miles of actually going through the role and doing it?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I also brought in one of the podcasts that I host, where we interview people, especially around real experiences. So questions about real experiences that they've gone through and what they learned about it. So it's something that I really enjoy doing. Understand the experience of the people around you, because they can be wide and very different from yours.
Absolutely. And the thing that's interesting here that you're talking about a lot of people coming together to help, I guess, mainly young engineers coming into the role, how to grow technically, professionally, even personally. And yet at some point, you weren't that interested in becoming a leader yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was pretty reluctant in the first place. And today, be sure that this is something that I want to do in the future, because I know I can, I know I like it, but still I'm in the phase of my career and my personal experience where I don't know if I prefer code or people. Let's say
it's a sort of an equal balance battling between the two of them then.
Yeah, and it's very different from when I started a couple of years ago in this role, because that was an 80-20, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, the amazing thing from my perspective is that the leadership role is constantly evolving and changing. So I don't think you ever get quite used to the balance. But I guess when leadership first became an option for you, what was your sort of instinctive reaction? Was it just sort of, no, that's not for me? Or was it a more nuanced than that?
The first answer was no. I'm trying to think about the discussions with my CTO, Enrico. And the first time we talked about the possibility of me changing role was to become an engineering manager. And I'm quite an experience-based guy. So I never really studied what a tech lead is, what an engineering manager is. Effectively speaking, 3 years ago, I was pretty new to the agile world, generally speaking. So most of the established things were pretty new to me because they were outside of the software engineering world. They were people thing, okay, because even agile and procedures thing than a technical one. And the first reaction was no, because Enrico started approaching with me the possibility to become an engineering manager. And so I'm mostly people guy and a less technical guy. And I was not prepared to leave the keyboard. Okay. So, that was a no initially. Then I thought about it with my wife also about the possibility to change role, because it's a pretty big difference than, writing code. Yeah. I started to study what could be going outside the comfort zone, but without too big leap. Okay. And so I came back to Enrico.
A safe step then.
And we talked about the possibility to go for a tech lead role. So in the vision that we have of the tech lead, it's of course a people role because you have to manage people, procedures, etc. But it's not a mostly people thing. And in our company jointly it became quite a mixed role because I still write code a lot, but it's not expected from me. And I think that was the real key for me to understand and appreciate the role, because I can decide what I want to build and I can decide what I want other people to build and what I think it's better for them. And so it's quite an equilibrium between coding all day and not coding all day, because that's how I'm behaving today. It's not a 50-50, it's 100% 0 and 0 100%.
Right, okay. So sort of flip-flopping between the two rather than being some sort of natural blend.
Yeah, I have the procedure day, the coding day, so it's mostly focus, yeah.
That's an interesting way to divide it, because I think a lot of people, before they get into the role, they have this view that it's kind of a little bit more cut up than that, sort of an hour of coding and 2 hours of leading and a couple of meetings and then followed by a bit more coding. But I mean, I think the way you've divided it up there is actually probably more representative of the way that most engineering leaders early on in that journey sort of actually end up working.
I had to, because my calendar has been pretty heavy for quite a lot of time at the beginning of this new role. And some periods still are like that. So I have a full calendar for the whole week. I can't even breathe during that week. And maybe a couple of weeks later, I start breathing again and code something and help the team to develop some Jira cards. Okay. And so it became quite natural to not think about having a focus moment, but trying to find a focus period in my calendar. So it's a week without without many events. Okay, so let's start coding. As soon as I start seeing some meetings catching up in my calendar, I stop developing and I start working on next procedure I have to work on, the next documentation I have to write, the next step of my leadership role that I need to do. And I started to focus on that because that is something that I can interrupt and get back into again. Coding is not something to do because the flow that you have in coding is not the same as writing, a conference document or thinking about something.
You need a lot more structure in your head for the code all the time.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting because the way you sort of were a bit reluctant to go into the role, I think I had almost exactly the opposite experience. I sort of, when I had the chance to become an engineering leader, I sort of jumped at it. I couldn't wait. And then when I had the opportunity to become a CTO, it's exactly the same situation. I think I thought I knew exactly what I was getting myself into, probably slightly arrogant if I look back. But that was, for me, I mean, do you think your own hesitation was sort of protective of yourself? Or do you think it was something where you're sort of being a little bit more realistic and perceptive about what the role actually is these days?
I'm pretty sure I was being protective because I always had deep technical knowledge in every team I have been working on. Not the smartest guy in the room, no, it's not like that. But I always knew I had some deep technical knowledge about some topics. So if I say I know something, it's probably because I do. Because code is easy, people are not. And my fear was that going into leadership would bring me apart from the coding knowledge, the technical topics. In the period I was starting to become a lead, so the first no I gave to Enrico was in the middle of a transition of my career progression because I was studying software architecture because of a friend of mine, Luca Mezzalira, topic. Yeah. And I started studying software architecture. I really enjoyed what I could do with my mind, with the architecture part and making the architecture part relate with the code. So I was starting to develop a different and broader knowledge of how to interpret code and how to interpret systems and behaviors. And the question was, do you want to leave all of that and start to become a people person? So yeah, I was defensive. I was trying to protect my knowledge, but maybe that helped me in some form or another because I stayed booth on the ground with the code. I still today love and enjoy what I do. But now I have the freedom to decide when to go into the code and when not to.
Yeah, indeed. And that freedom also brings with it a sort of a level of satisfaction from two different areas. One of them is, okay, I've done this code well, that feels great. And the other thing is, I've helped this person in a great way. That also feels great. When did you sort of first feel that moment of, okay, helping somebody else actually gives you sort of a kick, a feeling of being good, a feeling of success?
I'm not sure there is a specific moment, but probably I can find one pretty late in the journey. In 2025, me and Enrico went to the CodeMotion Milan and talked about how we tried to beat technical debt. Okay, so we prepared a talk about how we started to embrace technical debt in our journey and find ways to solve it in a way that was manageable for our team. And when we started working on this talk, he was talking about the digital and the business and the bureaucracy part, while I was thinking about the technical and the team part. And what I found out, we effectively sped up at a certain point. And that point was exactly the moment I stopped working on code every day, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours a day. And so that clicked in my head. And I said, wow, so I think that's the moment when I started helping people instead of what I thought was helping people. Because I always thought that we work in story points in sprint and doing the highest amount of story points, I always thought that was helping people in my team. Effectively, it was quite the opposite because I removed some possibilities for them to grow. And as soon as I started, let's say, delegating code to other people and start recognizing their authority in some specific topics, I found out that not only the story points didn't decrease between sprints, but the quality of our coding life was becoming better because people
for the whole team, you mean?
Because people could focus on what they wanted to do while others could focus on what they wanted to do. So I'm a platform guy. I like infrastructure. I like creating scripts, automation, etc. Right now, I'm working on an RPG game because it's all statistics and algorithms. And I like that part. I like the automation. I like all those things. And some people in my team didn't. They effectively to work on the user experience, the user interface. They wanted to study the database and improve the performance. So we started to focus on what we like the most and started understanding specific characteristics of the people of our team. And that really clicked.
And that's amazing that way you saw that most clearly was by looking back in hindsight and kind of forced to do by preparing this talk for the conference. Because I think that's one of those things where I think a lot of people have sort of a fear of letting go. And yet once they do let go, it changes things for the better overall, but it doesn't feel like it at the time.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's really happening because the code is immediate. It compiles or it doesn't. People do not, and procedures do not. Most of the procedures that you think about, that you write, that you document, that you talk with your team start working weeks or months or maybe even years later. That's what happened with our fight over technical debt. We took a really bad code base written in the past 10 years from a variety of people, from a widely different experience, and of course, coding standards and timelines, because that's what hurts the most in code quality. And as soon as we started seeing that the quality was becoming better, we didn't have we just knew, because people were happier to work on the code. And that effectively happened, I'd say 2 years after I started working at the company. Maybe now, 3 years. And it was 1 year I started doing the tech formally. So it needed a year for me to click about the idea that changing people could bring some impact.
And for yourself, I mean, so when you started being responsible for the outcomes rather than the individual tasks and everything, what was it that to you felt different? Or did it not feel different? Was that the point?
It did not feel different that much because it was a pretty natural journey. As soon as I joined the company, there were 3 other developers. Yeah, I was the 4th one in the team. And today, so in a 3-year journey, it was pretty natural to take that decision, to bring to myself that responsibility, to decide for that particular thing. So one day after another, people started not only following, but arguing with me, trying to understand what were my opinions about things and why I was so fierce about some of them. And people started gathering about the idea of the code quality that we all had in our minds. And we started working together through the idea that someone should take responsibility for the decisions and one should take the authority for those decisions. That's a thing that I also wrote in one of my latest blog posts about responsibility and authority, because it's something that I felt natural, but when I wrote that post and people started reading it, I found out it wasn't. I have a particular idea about responsibility and authority, and if I can, I spend a couple of minutes with it.
Absolutely, because you said something before about authority that I picked up that I wanted to ask you about, so it seems like a natural point to talk about it, because you mentioned about delegating the authority.
Yeah, what I think specifically for my team, but I think it can apply to many others, is that as a tech lead, I'm not the boss, okay? I'm not the chief of anyone. I'm the person responsible for the decisions. So what does it mean? It means that I am the one with the last word because I am responsible for that last word. It doesn't mean it just means I have to take the responsibility and the ownership of a specific decision. So it's something I need to agree with, or at least I need to know what could go wrong if we take that decision, even if I don't agree completely. So but I don't have the authority. So if I agree that you will work on the, maybe refactoring of the SSO mechanism, okay, you are the authority in that field. From that point, you are the SSO guy. I can't get into a conversation with you and say how you should work, okay? Because I'm not the authority in that field. I'm responsible for your choices, and that still remains, but still you are the authority. And that it's something that I found out was pretty rare, at least in Italy, in Italian tech team, but it's something that really worked well for our team, because I am the one with the responsibility. You are the one with the authority, but day after day, you start feeling responsible for my responsibility. I don't know if that feels correct, but
it's a pattern I see quite often, yes.
Yeah, if you know that if you mess up, I mess up, and you respect me, I put to the face, so you will become responsible and not only the authority of what you're working on. So that's, I think, the thing that worked better in all the decisions that we could make, all the procedures and all the technical decisions that we could make in our team. That was the most important thing. I trust you because you are the authority in that field, but please don't mess up because I'm the guy responsible for giving you the authority. And that's another thing. I'm responsible for giving you the authority.
Which means you can also take it back again if you need to. For example, if you're not authoritative enough.
Yeah, sure. It's something that can happen because there are many reasons for that. It's just maybe not the best period of your life and you want to give back some responsibilities, some authority on some parts. And so I have to bring it to some other tables, to some other people.
I love the way you frame this because this is something that I've actually battled with as well. And I came up with my own framework using 2 words in English that when translated into other languages often mean exactly the same word. And so I tend to separate out accountability and responsibility. And accountability is exactly the same as what you describe as responsibility, and authority that you describe it as, that's what I describe as responsibility. And so it's the same model, but with 2 different words. But the interesting thing is that your 2 words probably translate much better than accountability and responsibility, which, for example, in Swedish is exactly the same word. I've heard of other languages where it's the same thing as well.
Yeah. I started from the Italian meanings of the words, and then I went back to the English part because I didn't mention it in the beginning, but I'm Italian. So sorry after 20 minutes of this talk for my bad English.
Not at all. And I think the thing that's interesting about this is that now I've got a way to express it and to make it work in other languages where it's the same challenge. But I think the way you put it there, I think is actually very, very relatable. And I think a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders will have got to the point where they've realized that creating healthy accountability in engineering teams is not straightforward. And that division of sort of between authority and trust is actually quite a strong way of doing it.
Yeah, I can completely agree.
So should we move on to then talking about sort of the architect versus the manager tension without sort of forcing a position? Because, you sort of mentioned that you sort of jump between the two cleanly from day to day. But I think there is a tension there that a lot of engineers feel and worry about because they love building, they love solving, and suddenly they're in meetings. So what is it that really changes about sort of your technical identity when you move into leadership?
Well, there is something that I usually say. I'm a fan of the software architect elevator from Gregor Hope. The concept that the architect is the person going into the engine room with the developers and then to the top floors with the business. And I really think that everyone should benefit from this, even single developers in every team. So even individual contributors should still try to understand the business. So let's start from that. I think that everyone should understand the business because if you do not, you can't. It's not a possibility. You can't take good decisions. You can be lucky, and that's another thing. Or you can be a follower if you have a strong product team which takes all the decisions without providing any responsibility or authority or whatever to everyone and take every decision. But it's not something that can work on the long run. What I think works is every engineer should know the business. So starting from that, I don't think there is a great difference between being, in my case, a tech lead and a software architect. Okay, so let's start from this difference. Tech lead takes different decisions, but sometimes, at least in my case, which is pretty different from many others, we don't have an architect as a role. Okay, so architecture is a decision that we make all together in our team.
Yeah.
Of course, as I said before, I'm responsible for every decision. So I have to be the architect most of the time, or I have to be the accompanying architect, let's say. So someone brings to the table a solution and I have to counter check it and understand where
and
are
so
the
by
pain.
extension, that means that you need to understand the business to be able to do that then.
Yeah, for sure. That's, I think for me, is the primary thing. Every developer should know the business. Every role in every company should know the business in which they are working.
I couldn't agree more, but the number of people we see that don't is amazing, isn't it?
I think there's a reason for this. At least we'll talk about the Italian market and the Italian tech industry. We have many consultancy companies, really many consultancy companies. Most of the people that I work with daily or I speak to daily have spent at least 80 to 90% of their career into consultancy. And what I found out for the last 6 years working in product, 5-6 years, is that many people are forced to not care about the business. And I think that's one of the issues, because if you work in consultancy, you are not probably the person that will look at that code 1 year from now, or even 3 months from now. So that's, I think, one of the things that really don't click anymore today, because working in
so these very short-term engagements are kind of separating you from
it's
it.
care about the quality of what you're doing. You don't care about the documentation. Of course, you can if you do, but you are brought into this sort of perspective of, it's a phrase that I hear a lot. If you see a bug, leave it there because they will pay us to fix it. Okay. So it's not something, it's a bug that the missing documentation is the documentation that you have to write because it will be missing until you do it. Okay. So this is something, at least in Italy, it's something which is career-wide because most of the people working in tech work in consultancy. And it's not wrong per se. It's just something that brings you into a different perspective than what I think you should have. And so that's why I say that a software engineer should know the business and should understand the business they are working on. So that's, for me, it's baseline. So that's a thing that I always do when interviewing people for our company, for our tech team. It's a question that I ask. So what is jointly? So it's something that I ask them. It's not something them ask to me, because I want to know that people, of course, they can't know what jointly my company is and what it does on a daily basis, but at least they have to know what is the business.
Absolutely. And this, for me, is an example of how you have looked at the whole industry, specifically in Italy, and take your own, sometimes unique, but definitely objective view of the way business is done. Because I think in most situations, most people would run with the flow. They'd accept the dogma. They'd accept the standard thinking that the general approach that everybody else around them takes. But it seems to me you don't tend to do that.
Not at all. Of course, we are going back into the technical aspect of my career. And there is a phrase that I wrote into my LinkedIn bio, and I have to find it because it really needed a lot of time to to write it in that specific way. So I will read it because I think it makes quite a lot of sense. I said, dogmas are limits that we put on ourselves. I would fight a dev believing in clean code and another one discrediting it at the same table at the same time using the same arguments. So what do I mean by that? Best practices are there for a reason, and the reason is valid. The same goes for architectures. The same goes for agile principles. The same goes for everything else. Yet your situation is different. So dogma, best practice, that's okay. You have to know how a thing is called to help a conversation. You have to know how people usually do something because you need to know how you usually have to handle with those people. But dogmas are limits. You have to work differently and you have to understand how your specific situation needs you to solve it. If I can, I will bring an example. I was talking about technical debt, how we tried to solve it. And when we found out that the technical debt was the thing slowing us from a technical perspective, me and all the team started to think about a solution for trying to solve it. Okay. And we did a thing that everyone I talked with said to me it was a no-do. Okay. We started documenting technical debt. So we used the concept from software architecture about architectural decision records, so small documents about decisions taken to track technical debt. Okay.
Great approach.
People started, for correct reasons, argue about the fact that if you make someone document something that should be solved, no one will solve it because it's easier to document the issue instead of solving it.
Right.
As I said before, there is not a particular initial time for it, but we started seeing something different. People felt, I don't know if that's the correct word, but started feeling guilty about writing another technical debt into our documentation because it was like 45th or 46th technical debt that was documented, and people started feeling guilty about it. And so we started looking at particular thing. In our GitHub requests, we have checklist of things to do, and one of them is I wrote a technical debt about it. Okay, so I found out something that should be a technical debt and I documented it. And the row after that is I solved the technical debt with this PR. We started seeing the switch. We started seeing people documenting a new technical debt and solving another one. So the PR was double-faced. There was a new technical debt being discovered, but an old one being fixed. And then the new ones stopped becoming a thing. I don't mean that we stopped tracking them, but the initial months or even the initial year was 100% new technical debt. And then it started to become a 50-50. And then it became a 30-70. And today we are solving in 2025, we solved more debt than what we created, at least what we documented, of course, because there are many nuances of what it's not. But in our idea of a technical debt, we solved more than we got.
That's a good place to be. So you can shift that balance entirely over from, creating plenty or documenting plenty of it and actually then having less to document because there's more removed than put in. It takes time though. You mentioned that's an entire year's worth of track record. I can imagine that overall you've been working on that project for several years in order to get to the point where you've shifted that balance that far. Is that right?
Yes. And another thing happened that made us understand that a change was happening. Most of us joined the company in the last 3 years, as I said, because I was the fourth developer. We are 10 today. So most of the people and we started a migration from some PHP monoliths to PHP plus Node.js ecosystem, not because of the language, but because of the culture around how we built Node.js ecosystems.
Right.
Put heavy frameworks. If you work in PHP, you work with Laravel. And if you work with Laravel, you almost never write some simple PHP code. You use facades, you use accessories, you use configurations, you use a tinker, an artisan, etc.
There's plenty of boilerplate that goes into it, isn't there?
Yeah, and on the Node.js side, we went pretty lightweight. We started with simple things like an HTTP server, which is a Fastify, a simple logging, a library here, another one there. So nothing too heavy. We never used a real big framework on Node.js. And what we found out was that our way of working with the framework was increasing technical debt. While on the same side with Node.js, technical debt wasn't accumulating because projects were small. Those were, I do not say microservices because I don't like the word. They were mini services, small enough services, let's say. And as we track it, was not a thing because that service wasn't a monolith doing 1,000 things. It was a simple service doing a couple of them. So managing technical debt was way easier. So what we found out was that solving technical debt on the PHP part made us faster on the Node.js side. So we started improving our Node.js tooling. We started working mostly on Node.js. And that was another thing that clicked when we prepared the talk for the CodeMotion Milan, which was that in 2024, we started writing more Node.js code than PHP. And in 2025, the ratio became 4:1.
That's quite a significant shift. And so in terms of when you look at something, whether it's technical debt threat or whether it's dogma, when you want to push back, and what is it to you makes an opinion valuable enough for you to sort of say, okay, this is enough. We need to look at this in a different way. We need to get rid of best practices and look at our practice.
I like the idea that people don't just bring to the table the why of a decision, but also the why not. So that's why I'm a fan of architectural decision makers, because that's in the ADR, there is one thing that people mostly don't write, but I think it's the most important thing for an ADR, which is the considered options, of course, and the outcomes, but not in a positive way, in a negative way. So what are the negative outcomes of a decision? So let's say we move from an HTTP-based, a fully HTTP-based application to an event-based one. So let's go technical about an ADR. The decision, of course, can be valid because a message can be replayed, can be stored, can be persisted in a different way. If an HTTP server is not available, we can retry later, okay, with an event. But also the why not. And the why not could be even a people problem. No one in our team has ever gone through the event-driven rabbit hole, okay? Or maybe we don't know enough about queues and persistence, or maybe our user experience is not based on asynchronous messages. So what I like about every decision, and I try to bring this concept also to, people decisions, it's the why not.
Right. So what are the negatives? What are the downsides of it?
Yeah. So it's not just about why should I take a meeting with someone to talk about a specific topic, but also why not? So what are the negative consequences that I need to know about before making that decision? And that's something that I really enjoy when people bring to the table. So not just the why yes, but also the why not.
Why should we not? Because then allows you to make a balanced decision. So you can say, okay, given the positives versus the negatives, we can see that it is clearly positive. The other question I love to ask as well is why now? Because I think as a leader, one of those questions you need to ask is now the right time to do it? Should we delay it or should we have already done it? Because if you can figure out why now, then it's often another way of strengthening the decision to take it and actually invest in it now.
Yeah, I like it. In our technical roadmap for our team, me and Enrico put a new question for 2025 and 2026, which is what happens 6 years from now if we don't do it? So it's shifted in another way. It's not why now, but why not 6 years from now?
Yeah. So if we imagine that somebody who's listening to this right now, they're strong technically, maybe a little bit unsure about leadership, maybe they're resisting a little bit, but if you could give them sort of a handful of principles to think about as they grow, what would they be?
The first thing I say is ask your teammates, because they will have plenty of feedback and plenty of things to say to you. At least was my case. And
that's a really good tip.
I say is always try to go outside of your comfort zone. One step at a time. Don't do a too big leap.
Don't leap into the unknown.
On what you cannot do. When I decided to say no to the engineering manager role, I already had one kid and another one was arriving. I have a mortgage, etc. So it's not something that you can do easily. And so I started to move a little bit outside of my comfort zone, moving to the tech lead role. So one step at a time. The important thing is don't stay still, because being still is one of the worst things that you can do to your career. And I'm speaking by experience, because I stayed too far in some of my previous companies and I was not growing. And I realized it too late. I was the smartest guy in the room, let's say, but when you are, it's the moment that you switch the room, okay, that you change the room. That's another advice I had to do.
So that was the moment you realized when you are the smartest person, that's when you should start thinking about whether you need to go learn something new then.
Yeah, let's say if you think you are the smartest, because it's not always like that, but if you think you are not learning enough, and maybe it's your fault, because it can be, of course, your fault, maybe it's time for you to move to a different experience. And if you can, try to do a little step into something different. Try architecture, try leadership, try people. Or even on the opposite side, if you are a leader and not much of a technical guy, try to become a little more of a technical guy.
So staying close to technology is important for you then?
Yeah, because that balance never goes away if you really like this job, okay? That if I can think about myself 10 years from now, I still see myself sometimes coding some specific things, some open source library, some little nuances of something I'm working on. Of course, today with AI is already different, but...
It's different, but it is just faster.
Yeah. And I was looking at some LinkedIn posts about the coding being fun again. And I agree, because I don't have time today to work 8 hours a day on coding. Even in coding days, I still have some meetings, some things that I have to do. So I can't code 8 hours a day anymore. And as I said, I got 2 kids. So as soon as they come back from school, my focus time, my flow stops literally immediately.
Yeah.
With AI, coding is fun again, because as I said, I can work on my simple RPG game without needing to to write all the million lines of codes that I need for it. I just need to write some markdown files, some prompts to an agent. And of course, it's not something production ready, but it doesn't have to be. And it's fun again, because fun has never been production ready for me.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that's important in any leadership role, is that any role you take, it should still be fun. And if it isn't fun, then there's a balance to be shifted.
Yeah, there are some. Today, I delegate much of the functional things that the people do inside the team. So we have a product roadmap, and every part of this product roadmap is managed as an authority by someone on my team. But, something unique, something strange, something, AI-based, or maybe some relevant architecture challenge, I still want to go with them, to work with them, to analyze it with them. And sometimes I struggle to delegate that part, because if something is funny, it's hard to leave it to someone else. So sometimes I miss this part. I misremember this part, and I decide when the authority should. So this is a mistake I do, but it's a funny mistake to make, because...
And I think there's got to be some perks to leadership, right? If you can't choose what you're doing yourself, every now and again, Michael, let's try and distill all this wonderful advice down into a playbook that somebody else could look at. A junior engineer looking where they go next could understand. So out of that, I got first step is to choose the path intentionally. You mentioned taking small steps. You mentioned about deciding where you want to go in by asking other people what they think of you first. Number 2, challenging thoughtfully. Don't accept dogma. Ask other people around you what they think. Allow authority to come from the bottom, even if responsibility is coming from the top. You mentioned about staying close to the technology and taking responsibility of that seriously. And then the other thing you mentioned was step outside your comfort zone. Not leap, but step. And that is a really good distinguishing factor, because I think there are some people who think leadership, let's jump in 2 feet first into the deep end. That's definitely what I did. And I can definitely say that I think your approach is probably a lot more responsible way of doing it.
Yes. I'd like to add one last thing, if I can, Adam, which is praising and criticizing, because it's a thing I forget a lot. So it's a lesson for my future self listening to this episode. It's a thing that we usually say in Italy. I don't know if in English it sounds the same way, but we say praise in public, criticize in private.
Absolutely, yes. Well said.
It's not 100% true, because there are cases in which criticizing in public can work for some reasons, but it's something I always do wrong, because I like to praise, but I don't want to put a spotlight on people. So I miss the chance to praise in public sometimes. And also, if I'm angry for a decision, if something goes wrong, I usually criticize people. Let's not say in public with 100 people, but with the team. Sometimes it happens, and it's something that luckily enough, people in my team understand and can relate to, because I myself, person that can be criticized. Okay. So it's one of the questions I ask a lot. So what did I do wrong? So help me, not with the things that I did well and that I should proceed doing, but with the things that I did wrong and I should stop doing immediately. So please remember, praise in public, criticizing in private, because it's something we usually misunderstand, and people can really be hard for our decisions.
And it definitely helps with that growth factor as well when you do it that way around, because I think if you're praising people in public, you're showing a good example of what others can do to earn that praise, which I think is definitely something you want to encourage people to do. But at the same time, if you criticize in public, you can sometimes end up sort of creating that as the example, where you then see other people criticizing in public, and before you know it, you've got a blame culture, which is something we definitely want to avoid if we're trying to create a safe environment. So I think that's a really, really strong piece of advice. Michael, if you've got somebody who's perhaps somebody young listening to this early in their career, what would you hope that they would feel after listening to this conversation?
I hope they can feel that being wrong can help, because doing mistakes can help you grow even more. Because if you don't do mistakes and people don't give you feedbacks, you will probably think that you did everything all right. And, it's almost certainly not the case.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up. As one person put it, which I think sums it up quite well, the path to success is paved with failure. Michael, how can people reach you to carry on the conversation and find your writing?
I'm not a social guy, so you can only find me on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter account, or X. How do we have to call it? I have a Facebook and I have X on LinkedIn, and with a nickname that I should change because it's too hard to pronounce. And I have a blog, which is cadenvan.github.io, which is a little website I made with Astro, which was a fun experiment to do when I didn't have time to code, and which is AI driven today, of course, because I don't have time to write all by myself. And sometimes I write some blog posts, not that much, let's say 3 or 4 per year. And those are some thoughts that I'm trying to bring to writing.
Excellent. It's been wonderful speaking to you. We'll put those links into the podcast. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Adam. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform. Sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.